Wait, you have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV.
Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hey everybody, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. I am Ken Reed, as usual, your TV Guidance Counselor, here to talk about classic television using back issues of TV Guide magazine from my personal collection as the gateway into the difficult viewing choices of our collective past. I didn't mean to memorize that, but I did. Welcome to the show. I am Ken Reed, your on hiatus Boston stand-up comedian who has been doing the show from my office for over a year now, slowly losing my mind, or what was left of it. And here we are. My guest this week is the co-host of the Podcast Like It's 1999 podcast, because it's got a podcast, the title of the podcast, anyway, which is a super fun show. They're going through all the movies of 1999, and there's a bunch of offshoots, and they talk about pretty much if you're like this show, you'd like that show. So if you're a fan of that show and you're listening to this show, welcome. I think you'll enjoy this show. My guest this week is Phil Iscove, and Phil is the co-host of that show. He is the co-creator of Sleepy Hollow on Fox, which is a great show that lasted for 4 seasons, I think. Super fun show. If you're a fan of shows like Fringe, as I am, and you also like spooky things in New England, that is a show to watch. Clancy Brown, everybody. I mean, if Clancy Brown's in a thing, you watch it. I mean, that's... Anyway, we had a great time sitting and chatting. There's a lot of ER talk here, so the show, not actual emergency rooms. So don't worry about that if that's going to make you queasy. And it was just a great time, and I cannot thank him enough for talking to me. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, the co-host of the Podcast Like It's 1999 podcast and co-creator of Sleepy Hollow, Phil Iscove.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Live via satellite from sunny Los Angeles, Phil Iscove.
Indeed.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing? Thank you
Good.
for having me, man. I appreciate it.
I'm envious of you as a fellow Northeasterner who escaped.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I guess I escaped to a different difficult scenario, but
True.
but you know, nonetheless, I did escape the cold weather. Even though I honestly do miss snow. I know that might sound crazy, but I do miss it.
It's a different set of issues that you don't have to shovel, though.
This is true. Or pay someone to shovel.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because you grew up in
Toronto.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's also, as we will get into this, didn't have the same channels. So this will be fun because obviously it'll be a nice little time capsule and being able to go back in time. But also, I did not have access to a lot of these channels, so to be able to jump around in that respect will be fun.
But you got some other pretty good stuff though in Canada, which is. Yeah.
We did. It was, it's funny. When you reached out, I talked about like my love of ER. ER was my show when I was a kid. And I remember periodically, I mean, it aired on CTV up in Canada. So every time I watch ER, and I've watched it many times, I have to admit, every time the credits end, I expect a cutaway to the CTV newscaster. But that's not obviously what happened down here. And periodically there would be an episode that would be a direct feed. So you'd get like the NBC logo and the NBC ads, and it felt so exciting.
Yeah, like when presumably that was like the live episode and that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Which is credited with, I don't know if this is probably a well-known story, so if you know this, stop me.
No.
But that episode in particular is credited with George Clooney's movie career. Because
interesting.
That episode was directed by Steven Spielberg.
Really?
I believe directed.
I believe you. I think it is.
But he was like, this guy's a movie star.
Sure.
Because it was it was Spielberg because he was friends with Michael Crichton from Jurassic Park and all that.
Well, the whole ER inception, I know that story in the sense that Crichton came to him with ER to make as a movie. Spielberg read the script, said, I think this is a pilot. What are you working on next? And he's like, I'm working on a book about dinosaur theme park, and the rest is history. But yeah, I think that I know that, and what's funny about this issue. So when you reached out, I said, like, ER is my show. That's my broadcast show. And if there's a TV guide that has an ER cover, which there were a couple of them, that would be ideal.
And I sent you the one you didn't send to me.
Correct. You did, which is fine. But yeah, it's the one with Clooney on the cover, and it's really interesting to talk about the narrative around Clooney in this show. The narrative being, wow, this guy was in a bunch of shitty shows that didn't fly, but he's great now, and he's in a big show now. Like, it's so funny that was the narrative of like, this is his shot, so I hope you like him.
It's weird though, like, because the networks, and I'm sure you know this better than I do, having made television shows, but the networks, at least especially in the 80s and 90s, had people they just loved, actors, that they would put in everything year after year after. John Cryer's one of them, and they're all good people. Like, there's nobody I can think of where you're like, that guy's the shittiest.
Yeah.
Why does he? But it just, they were like, something's gonna hit, and Clooney was that for a decade, and he was actually in the original ER sitcom, which was based on because you're a horror fan, correct?
Ish.
Yeah. The Steppenwolf, not Steppenwolf Theater, the experimental theater group that's Stuart Gordon ran.
Okay, I don't know.
They were I forget what they were called, but most of the people who did Reanimator and the stuff. But one of the plays they did was that original ER.
That's funny.
And that's how they got the show. And then Stuart Gordon went and wrote Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which is extra weird. But but so Clooney was experimental stage guy. So he got into that then. And then they were like sitcoms. And it was at least 5 sitcoms.
He was also a recurring on a couple. I mean, he was on Facts of Life. He was on Roseanne. I mean, he was a real journeyman in that respect, and even his feature career, say what you will, but like, it's pretty late in the game, right? Like, he's in his like late 40s, I want to say mid to late 40s when his feature career starts to take off, which is, relatively uncommon. But yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, right place, right time, all of that, but he's also just like the perfect guy for this show in that moment, and he's tremendous on it. And I the impression you get is that he knew this thing was a hit, and he was like, I got to start the feature career right, like as soon as is fucking possible, or
I'll be on this forever.
It's fascinating to think about. I mean, he's talked about this in numerous articles and interviews, but like, he's shooting all these movies at night while shooting ER during the day. He's basically not sleeping. And for about 5 seasons of that show, and in the process, anywhere from 4 to 5 movies concurrent. I mean, it's lunacy. I don't know how he did it. But.
It kind of works though for an ER doc. That's almost the schedule he would be keeping. So maybe it was just really method. But the other genius thing here is, even though some of the roles he had done on television had dramatic elements, like stuff on Roseanne, and he was in Bonnie Hunt's pilot for the Building, I think, because they're friends, but in a very dramatic role. He's like, this guy's so charming and funny, put him in comedies, and it's like, no, that's what you were doing wrong.
That's what you were doing wrong. He is funny though. I mean, he has a lightness. He's very charming. I mean, I think that and this town is guilty of it in many respects, of misconstruing charming with funny. Like, they're not necessarily the same thing. So as you very well know, I do a podcast with Kenny Neibart, my friend, and also a TV writer in his own right, about all the films that came out in 1999. And a couple weeks ago, we recorded an episode on The Minus Man, which is a movie that I'm sure no one really knows exists. Maybe you do.
I've seen it. Yeah.
I'm sure, with Owen Wilson playing a serial killer, essentially. And Janeane Garofalo, who is fantastic in that movie, fantastic in general. I love Janeane Garofalo. So
she was doing some great, like, she did Clay Pigeons that year, I think, or the year before or after. She did a bunch of those kind of roles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's that idea of like Owen Wilson, Vince Vaughn both had this moment where Hollywood is like, are they our next sort of serious actor? And you're like, no, they're not. But, you're going to try, I guess. So, yeah,
it was, they just, and they'll go, once you make it to that, that's what you do. Like, you're the serious actor now.
Right. And then for Vince Vaughn, I don't want to say he's lucky, but, the fact that Old School happens and gets him back into that lane. And then obviously he's doing comedy for many years to come. And for Owen Wilson, who has a fascinating filmography,
amazing writer,
actor, great writer, tremendous writer. It's just really interesting. Comedy and charming.
The only person who cracked that code, Robin Williams, and the key,
and Tom Hanks,
was dramatic roles beard, comedy roles no beard.
Interesting.
I've never seen anyone else try to tackle it that way, but that was from the Fisher King on.
Right.
That was how he did it. And
so can I ask, there's one outlier, and I don't want to throw a wrench into your
Patch Adams?
Beard, no beard. No, it's Dead Poet Society.
Oh, you're right. No, does he have a beard in Dead Poet Society?
He doesn't have a beard in that, but that also might, I don't know if is that a purely dramatic role? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a bit of both. But your beard no beard rule is a solid one. And
I'm just shocked I've never seen another actor attempt that that move,
Yeah, you would think that more would do it. It is amazing how put a beard on a guy and all of a sudden you're like, wait, is he a professor now? Is he a doctor now?
Is he a serial killer? Is he a man haunted by his wife's death?
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
He was the only one who did it.
Yeah.
So this is 1996, I think. It is.
This is 95.
95. So we're looking at February 25th, 1995. And it's Clooney all smirky and sultry on the cover, and it says TV's Hot Doc.
It's an amazing cover. If people haven't looked at it recently, I would say that this puff piece about him at the center of this TV guide is he's wearing this. I don't know if the suit is mint, but because the text is mint next to it, it makes there's like this cross-pollination going on. A hideous tie, a weird low angle. He looks sleepy. It's all just bad.
He's dressed kind of like The Mask. Because it's 95, so they were 95. Those sort of terrible speaking of Vince Vaughn sort of swingers, 90s swingers things have come in, so they've clearly dressed him like that. And this is sort of the last gasp, the last decade of TV Guide where they still had huge budgets to do like full-on photo shoots, and they weren't just republishing press releases, like they're creating content, and they definitely
I think that people, first and foremost, it should be said that this is TV Guide in and of itself is a relic of a different time, and just scanning through the PDF that you sent me, it really does. It's so unreasonably comforting to flip through a TV Guide because it just doesn't exist anymore. But it was a publication that could be sort of clumped in with your Entertainment Weeklies and your what have yous at that time, right? Where, to your point, they had reporters that were actually reporting stuff and taking the time to talk with George Clooney for however long he had. It's just interesting.
They were commissioning art. Like it was, I was talking the other day with a guy who's writing a book on moonlighting, and we were talking about how moonlighting was sort of the shift of where entertainment journalism became all about getting scoops and spoilers. And that before that just was not the case. It would be more critical, introspective. You'd have puff pieces, but it was more of like true criticism instead of like a scoop about what's going to happen in a thing. And then that got worse and worse with Lost and X-Files, all these shows that Twin Peaks. And, so the reporting became about like what's going to happen on the show. But there's a fascinating thing in here too. Well, first of all, there's a thing about Stephen Ray, who became a super hot actor after The Crying Game. And then they put, it's just a very weird little article. And I forget how much of a cultural phenomenon that movie was.
It's funny you bring that up. I weirdly, apropos of very little, watched Ace Ventura the other night.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say.
It just happened to be on TBS, and I hadn't seen it in forever. And I was like, what, I'm gonna watch Ace Ventura. Why not? Tough to sit through now for a bunch of reasons. Perhaps the most obvious one being that Jim Carrey is so dialed to like a million that it's exhausting to watch on some level. And then there's the offensive component of the trans element in the film. You deal, if you will, and the using of The Crying Game as sort of the twist at the end of the movie, which also made me go like, oh, right, like that was a big twist. That was like a crazy thing, and
Yeah, that I recently, people younger than us, because we're roughly of the same age, I think, they've mentioned that and how like offensive and anti-trans it is, which it is. But I'm like,
150%.
totally. But I'm also like, but without the context of that being a parody of a very popular movie, it seems way more hateful than it's probably intended.
Yeah, I mean, it's meant to be a parody, right?
Yeah.
Like it's meant to be sort of almost Mel Brooksy, although even he wouldn't probably go to that that sort of lengths. Yeah, it's interesting how that movie caught the zeitgeist in the way that it did, because it was an kind of progressive movie when you think about it on some level, although also regressive and offensive in its own way too. So like it's dealing with a whole bunch of stuff that's weird. But anyway.
But it's an indie English small movie to become a giant phenomenon that everybody knows the ending to. It was like, you know what it was the go-to reference that Brokeback Mountain was for those kind of people.
What also, I mean, and this is opens up a whole other barrel of monkeys, but is that it birthed Miramax, right? Like it gave us Harvey Weinstein. It gave us that whole thing, and it started that idea, or at least got the ball rolling on the idea of sort of, acquisitions of films from film festivals and finding ways to distribute them and creating that whole chain of events.
It legitimized Harvey Weinstein. I think the first movie him and his brother made was The Burning. If you've ever seen that.
No, they got in the Oscar game. They were just like, if we can legitimize and find a way to ride these movies. I mean, listen, they were shrewd businessmen, and they gave us some truly wonderful films, even if Harvey's a despicable person. But
yes, I mean, they were basically doing what Troma did, except buying good movies.
Yes, but it's buying good movies
and putting their name on them. And ruining Jackie Chan movies. And then there's
ruining Bong's not a big fan either. I don't think.
No. There's a thing about what I watch, which they did in the 90s, and it's always shocks me to see who they interview in this. This one, it's Rodney Dangerfield, which is kind of bizarre, and he watches sports. American movie classics and C-SPAN, and I was like, yeah, okay.
C-SPAN was a surprise, though, if I'm being completely honest. He didn't seem like the most politically aware guy, but
he was kind of a miserable guy and was anxious about everything all the time. And those of us who suffer from that, guilty.
Oh, I'm right there with you. Believe me.
We like to just torture ourselves with that sort of thing, I think.
I do think, not to on the Clooney article, just very quickly. He's in an ABC show called Baby Talk, which was based on Look Who's Talking.
Yep, with my friend Julia Duffy.
Oh, that's awesome. There's a couple pictures in this article too of some of the things that he was in. Sunset Beat, where he's on a motorbike. He's got some really long hair. He's in a shot with Celia Ward because he was on Sisters for a short time. Then the Elliot Gould CBS thing, that ER thing. It's just funny. And I have to say too, I was locked into this show, or at least I was very sort of like excited for this show because of the Spielberg component. It's coming after Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in '93, and I'm just kind of in the tank for Crichton and him and all of that. Didn't know who the hell George Clooney was. Like that was the thing about this show too, is that it had a cast of people that for all intents and purposes were pretty much unknowns. Yeah,
absolutely. Anthony Edwards and Clooney were really the only people who you'd seen in things before. Eric LaSalle, I think, was a big New York theater actor.
I just saw in Coming to America, which I'd never seen before.
The original?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. He's really funny in that
he's
movie.
Pretty great in that movie. But not playing a funny role in ER. Nope. He's playing just a dickhead.
Totally.
Like he's an asshole. Great. Yeah, it's very convincing. And Anthony Edwards, was a movie actor. Like he did almost zero TV aside from Northern Exposure towards the end. But he was a guy who's in, actually, have you ever seen the movie Miracle Mile?
I have.
Oh, he's
very good. Great. Yeah.
That's like, you should just be in everything. But yeah, so Clooney was kind of the biggest name. And I remember that Chicago Hope and ER started the same week. Mm-hmm. And when you look at like the fall preview or even Entertainment Weekly, they have to treat all the new shows like that could be the show that's on forever because you don't know. And they were like, Chicago Hope. And then there's this other one that's kind of the same called ER, but Chicago Hope. We got Mandy Patinkin.
Well, and it's David E. Kelly. I mean, David E. Kelly, who's it's arguable whether there was a bigger TV producer at the time than him. And everyone had their money on Chicago Hope. I mean, it should also be said too, Spielberg, not very successful in television.
Amazing stories, dinosaurs,
Sequest. I mean, he tried, but his TV stuff just wasn't working. This also, again, not to get too technical or to industry, but it was a 2-hour pilot, which was not the norm. It's, I think, one of the best pilots ever made. But again, it's kind of a feature. It's challenging in terms of its storylines, in terms of all the things that are going on in it. So the question was really, is the audience going to rise to the sort of watermark that ER is demanding of them at the time, or are they going to fall back on Mandy Patinkin and David E. Kelly and what have you? And they air on the same night, and
Monday nights
blows it out of the water, and Chicago Hope goes running to Mondays, I think, pretty soon after. Yeah.
And Chicago Hope, not a bad show. Like, it's a decent medical
Chicago
drama, but
totally.
just in comparison. And ER is a show that I absolutely loved. I watched every week from like inception to end, and I tried to rewatch it recently. And although I recognize the quality, I put it into a category of things I'll call excellent show, never want to see it again.
Really?
Because it was just so heavy, like I'm glad I went through that, but it was just like,
it's not a light show.
No, it's brutal, and it's so well done that it just stings even more. And in some cases it's almost worse when you know what's coming, because it's that sort of Hitchcock bomb under the table.
For sure. You're also talking to a person whose favorite show is 6 Feet Under. So, you're talking to someone who perhaps relishes darkness too much at times. So for me, I have only watched ER in its entirety once because it's 15 seasons long. And let's be real, I've watched those first 6 seasons though more times than I'm willing to admit. So,
they're amazing. And one of the weird things too is, because Sleepy Hollow was a fun show, although with horror and death elements, I don't want to call it a light show because it's not light, but it's not, even though dealing with these sorts of things, it didn't have the grim weight of something like ER. And it's interesting to me because all the procedurals, all the murder investigationals, all those shows aren't as depressing as ER, where there's no mystery. It's just like a sad person dying, and it's just brutal.
I mean, they do save a lot of people too.
They do. There's at least one every episode they don't save, though. Like every week, there's at least one where they're like, the guy we thought wasn't even in danger all of a sudden seizes and he's dead.
You know that if the doctor is being dismissive or cavalier in Act 1, that person's dead by Act 5. Like,
absolutely,
that's just the way that it is.
Yeah, a helicopter's gonna come in and kill them.
That's just how it goes. Or a helicopter's going to crush them down. Something like that.
But just like anyone can die at any time kind of show. And you also got the impression that, at least for me when I was watching it, I'd be like, oh man, there's only one act left and nobody's died. Who's it going to be? Like, we're waiting. Waiting for it.
Yeah, no, it was pretty, I agree with that. Yeah.
Whereas 6 Feet Under, it was playful.
Well, and also, stuff. I mean, your death was up top. Right. So every episode opens with, your cold open or your teaser that is of somebody dying. Yeah. I mean, it was a different, yes. Alan Ball has a lighter touch than Michael Crichton does when it comes to funny humor. Yeah, shockingly, who knew? But
it's funny that Crichton too got legitimized isn't the right word, but like if you look at his stuff pre Jurassic Park and ER, it's pretty much like, even though he's a doctor and he's a smart guy, it's exploitation kind of garbage,
Well, he's
entertaining, making Coma,
kind of pulpy, very sort of like campy is the wrong word, but like trying to be the Stephen King of medical scientific stuff.
Yeah.
Is sort of where he's going for. And also, I mean, again, directs stuff on his own right, directs Westworld, directs things as well. Like, Andromeda Strain was a big deal. He was pretty big in the 70s and 80s. And then there's a bit of a lull, and then obviously Jurassic Park just puts him in a whole new stratosphere, and then he's like the guy for that stuff.
Yeah.
And then people start combing through all his old stuff and making Congo and
and
like,
what was the other? There was one
Disclosure.
Yeah, that was what's her
Ray
name?
Levinson.
Demi Moore.
And
in
Demi
that?
Moore.
Yeah.
Demi Moore.
Yeah, it was a weird. What a weird career. Like
it's a weird. He was, but again, like brilliant guy.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that should be said, and obviously we won't just talk about ER for this entire thing, but I'll just say this: I do think that he found a way to make quote unquote believable or more believable medical scenarios palatable to a large audience, which is a really impressive thing. Whether or not an ER feels like it does on ER, which obviously I think we all know that it doesn't feel like that constantly. It has its moments of feeling like that, but it doesn't feel like it
maybe
all the time.
Every third ER has a Clooney in real life.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I think that people perhaps don't give enough credence to the bar that ER set in terms of what people were willing to roll with in broadcast television. And I think that it does pave the way for shows to be bolder with their character work, but also with the narrative structure of things, to allow threads to not resolve themselves, for characters to just disappear. These were things that, for all intents and purposes, up until that point, wasn't done as often. And John Wells deserves a tremendous amount of credit for that as well.
It mined nighttime soaps. It like strip mined them for like kind of the one good thing that they did, which was, that wasn't intentionally kind of campy and, high drama, but the sort of continuity and serialization that was on television, at least, pretty much relegated just to soaps.
No, for sure.
Thing.
Well, and it's you've got you have your sort of your Botchko stuff, right? I mean, obviously Hill Street Blues, NYPD Blue,
Cop Rock,
Milch. Okay, everyone's favorite Cop Rock.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that that sort of synchronicity in the 90s of broadcast television really pushing the boundaries, and then the decade ends with The Sopranos, which is really kind of the beginning of the whole next next leg of the golden age of television. So,
and as a huge sort of TV nerd and a 20th century pop culture nerd, I'm talking about you. No,
no, you can't.
I'm talking about me, but I assume you're probably in a similar boat. There's three genres where we always have one of those shows on at any time. There's always a doctor show. There's always a cop show. And more or less, there's always a teacher's show.
Or a legal.
School or illegal. And so it's kind of a nice barometer of what's going on in culture in all those decades when you compare them. And ER breaks the cycle because all the previous doctor shows were either very serious environment, everybody's wacky, which is basically St. Elsewhere, even though it had some heavy stuff, or just a soap opera, like Dr. Kildare. It's just a soap opera. It's in a hospital,
or a straight up procedural, right? Where you're Quincy or you're something along
Marcus
those lines.
Welby and
Marcus Welby, that stuff. Yeah.
And this managed to sort of cherry pick the best of all those things, and they're like, get me the guy from Return to Horror High, and Return to the Killer Tomatoes, and then we have a perfect combination.
Well, it's I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but I think it's worth underlining and repeating. Crichton writes the pilot, which for all intents and purposes is an amended version of his feature that he presented to Spielberg. It never writes another episode, is from all accounts, as far as I can tell, not involved in the television show really from that point on. It really is John Wells' baby. And I think that, due credit should be given to him to using his years of knowledge, his China Beach knowledge, his what have you, to be able to, as you just said, pick those lanes, find that stuff that he could sort of, cherry pick, as you said, and pull them together to make a show that felt so fresh and felt so new, and yet at the same time felt very familiar. It's a fine balance. So, but
Yeah,
anyway,
and it gives
I could
us
talk about ER for hours. So I mean,
last thing I'll say about
RB
ER, we'll end up in the ER, is the best example to me of the way ER changed things is if you look at Empty Nest before ER.
Everyone's favorite spin-off of Golden Girls.
One of the few spin-offs that had its own spin-off with nurses.
Right. He was a doctor.
He was a doctor, yeah. And like half the show was in the hospital.
That's true.
If you look at that, or even Nurses, post ER you get Scrubs, which is a show, is a sitcom, but it's more like ER than a sitcom. And you wouldn't have had that otherwise, which is
I think that, I mean, listen, if I had my druthers and there were more than 24 hours in the day, Lord knows I would have made an ER podcast by this point, and just really just kind of did a deep dive with some of my favorite people and just talk about ER for days on end. Because I do think that ER is much more of a flashpoint than perhaps people give credit to any number of HBO shows or any other shows that sort of came off of it. It changed the way people watch television, and it afforded us the opportunity to be able to keep breaking down barriers of narrative structure and how characters are drawn. So I think that people say like, yeah, it was a medical drama on NBC and it was a big hit, and it was all of those things too. Right. But I think it was a groundbreaking show in its own way too.
Yeah, it managed to do what the sort of event television miniseries did in blips, but consistently for 15 seasons every week, which is...
Well, you also, you mentioned this earlier to sort of come back to the Clooney of it all. The live episode is Clooney's baby. He's the one that says, I want to do this because my dad was in live television and I remember Failsafe and I remember these things. And I want to take this thing for a ride, right? Like I want to use what we've got here. Like Clooney's a guy of TV, born and raised in the TV world. So for him to get to be in a powerhouse show like this and say, season 4, season premiere, we're doing 2 live shows, one on East Coast, one on West Coast. And there's going to be fuck ups and it's going to be crazy. And it's going to give us a tactile urgency that we have not had before. I mean, you got to hand it to them for understanding the power and leverage that they had at that time. So
especially in a show like that, where they had done the sort of live episode gimmick in the 80s a few times. Give Me a Break did it. Rock did it, if you remember that show. But that was because they had all stage actors. It was New York stage people. And those shows are basically plays. ER is a film. It's a live film, and it's very different.
And it's steady cams and it's long takes. And it's, I mean, I remember, and this I promise will be the last thing I say about ER. I remember them doing interviews with the cast and crew and all that around the time of the episodes. They were really touting it, and they're really trying to kind of make it a big ratings thing for them, which I think it was. But I remember a lot of the actors being, as you said, legitimately nervous. These were TV actors. And I don't mean to say TV and theater actors are of a lesser,
it's different skill set.
It's just a different skill set. Right. So it's like for them, it's like, this is a lot of medical jargon, which they're not probably great at on a good day. It's just a lot of, technical, what have you. And just the fear they had. I remember something that stuck with me. And I said this to my roommate a few nights ago, because ironically, we are rewatching ER right now. And I worked on Station 19 for a few seasons. So, I understand what it's like making medical stuff. And one of the things that actors kind of hate most are the fucking gloves, because they don't go on smoothly, right? Like you can't look cool putting them on. You can look cool taking them off, but putting them on is just, they stick to you weird. They're frustrating. And I remember one of the actors talking about that for the live episode and being like, I'm going to look like a fucking idiot all the time with these gloves. It's a thing.
Yeah, it's the weirdest little thing that just can just hold them up. Yeah. And then before we get into the listings here, there's one thing I wanted to mention, which they put under the sci-fi fantasy banner on page 42. And they have a focus on MTV's adaptation of The Max, Sam Keith's The Max, and which was not great. And it just wasn't.
I never saw it. Yeah. I
mean, I'm a big comic book guy. The Max comic was like, it was kind of clearly a comic he developed in the 70s when he was like 17, and reading underground comics in Heavy Metal magazine. And then 20 years later was like, I'm not going to change a thing.
Perfect.
Yeah. And people are like, oh, whatever. But there's a big article about Duckman, which is such a great show. that I don't know if you're familiar with.
I don't know Duckman. Can you tell me about Duckman?
Oh man. So in the wake of The Simpsons, it was that thing where television networks go, this is a hit, green light anything like it, but the thing that they distill from it is the wrong thing. So it was like after Cheers went off the air, they were like, we need shows in Boston. That's what it was. It was Boston, and that wasn't it. And so after The Simpsons, they're like, animation at nighttime. So we have Family Dog, and we have Fish Police, and we
The Critic
the Critic was right after. Yep,
Fish Police.
Yeah, Fish Police. But Duckman was one of the things that got greenlit during that time, and USA Network was producing original television at the time. And the guy they got was this guy Everett Peck, who was like a really cool, weird underground comics artist, and they let him do whatever he wanted. He hired Jason Alexander, and it's a fucked up, weird show, and not in like a shock humor South Park kind of way, about this asshole duck private eye who lives with his kids and his dead wife's sister. And
it sounds like Harvey Birdman. Remember Harvey Birdman?
Yeah, it's of like if that was very serious. Like it's
of course. Yeah. Because that's what everyone wanted.
It was such a weird show. It was on 3 seasons and it never looked cheap. Wow. Yeah, it never looked cheap. It had a really distinct visual style and was really funny. Amazing character voice actors. Dweezil Zappa did the music, and like it's just
okay.
Yeah, and no one ever remembers it. And I was just pleased to see a whole 1-page article on this thing because it's really good. Yeah, it was a good show that needs to be rediscovered.
I have to say, you said the USA Network, and I know that this to our listeners is going to sound crazy, but it kind of blows my mind as I was going through this TV guide that some of the networks that exist now existed back then, because I did not have access to them in Canada, right? USA, AMC, these things, Nickelodeon, these things didn't exist really up in Canada.
Yeah, Comedy Central, which you got
Comedy
later.
Central. It's not to say that the content didn't make its way up there, because it did, but it came under different banners because there's Canadian networks that were airing it. So all of these, like, I was just like, wait, USA was around in 1995?
Oh yeah.
Like it's crazy to think how long these networks have been around for. And it's why, this sea change that we're in right now, where we're seeing all of these networks getting sort of bundled under these umbrellas of their corporate overlords or what have you. It's a little sad to think that listen, Peacock, I hope it's a huge success. I don't have anything against Peacock, but there is a part of me that's just like a little part kind of dies when you're like, so wait, USA is just going to be a button underneath the Peacock thing now?
And it doesn't have an identity either. Like that was the thing when broadcasting was a thing.
Yeah.
They would try to develop a station identity that wasn't just like, we're the homicide channel. It was like, here's the brand of stuff we do on this channel. Yeah. And USA is an interesting one. It started in the 70s as the Madison Square Garden Network.
Really?
So what it was the in-house feed for events at Madison Square Garden, so they can have, and then they were like, well, we have the cameras and stuff anyway. Let's broadcast things, the sporting events and whatever in this. So then they had to buy a license, and then they're like, well, we have the license. Let's just do a channel. So it got like it was this weird snowball that it rolled into. And then they started mid to late 80s, they started buying canceled shows and producing new episodes. So that was their big thing. Silk Stockings, they bought from CBS. They bought Pacific Blue from CBS. They bought The Hitchhiker, speaking of Canada, from HBO, and the Ray Bradbury Theater from Canada as well, and started making new episodes and airing the back catalog. And that was kind of their,
it's funny, as you were just talking there about how they just sort of were like, well, I mean, I guess we've got this audience. I guess we'll just become a network. Yeah. And I feel like the same thing happened with IMDb.
Yeah.
Where they were just like, well, I mean, we've got all these eyeballs. So why don't we just try to, and by the way, I've never watched a thing on IMDb TV. Maybe it'll turn into a big thing. I don't know. It feels a little bit weird to me, but I guess if you are a subscriber to IMDb, if you have IMDb Pro, I guess you want to, get
it's on
access to
Prime
content,
though
but-
too. Like, so the thing I like
Right.
about it
With
is
ads.
is like Spencer for Hire is all on IMDb TV.
Okay.
And like some shows like that where
Yeah.
that seems like where that should live, because a person looking a show like that up is going to want to go, I'll watch it, like immediately.
That's true.
But
That's true.
we'll see where that stuff goes.
Yeah. I'd be curious. Yeah.
USA Network was weird. And then speaking of Janeane Garofalo, I don't know if you saw on page 49.
Oh, the
here.
SNL drama. It's the best.
Yes.
I was going to highlight that in the TV Guide update section.
Yes.
There's this so I don't know, you obviously will know far better than me, but if this section is always dedicated to like Hollywood gossip and insider, what have you?
Sometimes, but not as much as this.
Particular article is all about the drama that's percolating at SNL and how they're all kind of breaking, and by they, Sandler, Chris Rock, Chris Farley, David Spade are all kind of off doing movies now, which are, by the way, produced by Lorne Michaels. So I don't really feel all that bad for him.
Yeah.
But he's producing all these things, and how it's hurting SNL because of, spreading everybody so thin. And Janeane Garofalo is taking a break from SNL, but probably won't come back. And I just, first of all, like, more power to Janeane Garofalo. She should be in everything. I watched The Truth About Cats and Dogs, which is referred to in this article.
Which
the other
she's
day,
great in.
And she's fantastic in it. She's great in The Minus Man, as we mentioned earlier. Janeane Garofalo should be in fucking everything. She's great in the final seasons of The West Wing.
Yep.
I adore her. I just did a mini series, not just, but a few months ago, I did a Felicity mini series on all the episodes from '99 of Felicity, and just hearing the dulcet tones of Janeane Garofalo's voiceover as Sally is just it's like a warm blanket.
She's it's weird. She's a friend and has been on the show, and it's funny reading this from the TV Guide side because I've talked to her about this, and we talked about it on the show, and seeing what the real story is and seeing here is fascinating, because what actually happened is she quit the show during the opening credits of the first episode of the season. And if you notice, she's in almost zero sketches that season, but is in all the filmed commercial parodies and that stuff. Because they would do all those over the summer.
Right.
So she's literally, because SNL is notoriously like the worst fucking environment to work in ever. And Lorne Michaels is this crazy person. And I've just heard a billion stories.
Oh, I'm sure.
Nightmare.
Terrible.
He's like, everyone's in a weird social experiment to him. But she had enough. And so during the opening credits, she quit. And he says to her, he goes, Janeane, you can't quit. And she goes, why? And he goes, because Don Pardo's just about to say your name. Because it was literally during the opening credits. So she had quit, but wasn't officially quit.
That's fantastic.
So she just didn't go to work it was just this crazy thing.
Well, it feels like I wrote this down in my notes too, but like, she's better than SNL at that time. I mean, and I would argue maybe at all, period. I think that she has such a specific brand of comedy, which I adore, which is just entirely her own. And I think that something that's kind of required of SNL is a chameleon, is a person who is just a little bit, I don't know what the right word is, but just reading this article, I was like, yeah, no, of course she's like, why would she she's so much better than all of that kind of shticky stuff.
They need utility players is what it wasn't.
Yeah.
This grew out of, she had done the Ben Stiller show 2 seasons before this, which was a sketch show.
Of course.
And kind of half those people did Mr. Show, and the other half either were Ben Stiller or Janeane Garofalo. So they were like, she just did sketches. So they hired her for this. And this was, SNL was, it was one of their low points where they were like, all of our long-standing cast members quit. What are we going to do? And so they said, let's stack it with ringers. So Chris Elliott was on it. Michael McKean was on it. Like it was a weird collection of people. This is like before they got Will Ferrell and all those people. And this is the season that Lorne Michaels said, I'm never hiring a stand-up again.
Really?
Which is when they started exclusively hiring basically like improv people. Because they're like team players and they don't have.
I mean, that makes sense.
Their own kind of thing that they're doing,
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, and by the way, like I certainly hope that nothing I said was interpreted as slander towards any of the people on SNL.
No, not at all.
I think they're all tremendously talented people. And looking at this cast and this bench when she's there, when Janeane is there, quote unquote, there, it is probably like and again, nothing against Kristen Wiig and Bill Hader and that whole crew, but this feels like I remember being a kid around this time, and I was not really an SNL person around this time, but I remember my friends just feeling like these people are fucking rock stars, right? Like you had your Mike Myers, you had your, Dana Carvey, like all these, it was a really impressive group of people. So
yeah. And they were breaking out in TV stars.
Yes,
my favorite thing someone says is there's a definitive answer to what the best season of SNL is. Unarguable definitive answer. And it's whatever season you watched when you were 12 years old.
yeah, sure. That feels right.
That's pretty much it's true. So, but at the same time, you're right. Like these people were it was a slightly different vibe,
different vibe.
There. But it was just so funny seeing that thing with Janeane. It's like,
it's amazing. And also just the weird synergy of me having just watched Truth About Cats and Dogs the other day and thinking about how that movie didn't get the love it should have got back in that moment, and thinking like there's an Earth 2 where Janeane Garofalo is the movie star she should have been. But anyway,
it was weird how she was like, she's the frumpy one, and I'm like, she's beautiful. Like, what are you talking about?
Wonderful.
She's an actress. Like, she's a movie star,
it's ridiculous.
But very weird. Let's dive in, and I know you had some picks here. So what struck your fancy?
Are we starting with Saturday, or
let's start on Saturday?
Order? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot on TV on Saturday nights, so it was a little bit of slim pickings. My eyes locked on The Untouchables from 8 to 10:30. Forgive me, I didn't see what channel it was on, but The Untouchables is fucking great.
Mm-hmm.
If I was home on a Saturday night, which Lord knows I probably was in 1995, I was probably watching a movie of some sort. So I feel like that's probably where I'm at. And the Untouchables leading into a half hour of Cheers to cap it off at the end of that time slot is kind of a beautiful thing.
A show about Prohibition era cops, and then a show about alcoholics in a bar.
Beer. Which feels perfect to me. And I also probably at this time would have checked in on the Screen Actors Guild Awards probably periodically to see what was going on there.
Fair enough. And Untouchables is De Palma?
Yeah.
De Palma. Yeah. Probably the most straightforward De Palma movie.
Definitely up there. Yeah. And one of his most successful because of that.
Because someone said, don't do Body Double again. But that is a great movie. There's also a weird show I just want to mention because I totally forgot about it. And it's clearly a show they made based just on the pun title.
Okay.
And it's called Robin's Hood.
Okay.
And it stars Michelle Phillips, and I think it's a show about like foster kids is the best I can as my guess, just based on looking at it. But the big thing in this episode is Rick Springfield joins the Hoods to save the Robin's Nest. And it's like, not only is it Robin's Hood.
I'd definitely check that out. I mean, if we're channel surfing and we're jumping around, why wouldn't I want to see what Rick Springfield has to bring to Robin's Hood?
And to just show you the difference between ER and other medical dramas before Robin's Hood, your Robin's Hood appetizer, if you will, is University Hospital. The action gets feverish when a deadly plague hits the hospital.
Well, I mean, if you're making a hospital show, you got to have a plague at some point. I mean,
you got to put it in a university.
Virus.
You got to have those co-eds. And,
yes, of course.
Just ridiculous. There's a lot of weird dumping ground shows here that they've put on this Saturday night trying to see what the hell people will watch. Yeah.
There's also, it occurred to me as I was scrolling through or scanning through all of these different grids, is that we're sort of in awards season a little bit. We've got the Grammys, we've got the Screen Actors Guild, which, anyone who is watching TV around this time knows that like they just eat up big slabs of the schedule. And it also affects what people run up against them. So you'll get a lot of repeats, you'll get a lot of stuff like that. So anyway.
But it's also sweeps.
Yes, and
it's
it sweeps.
February sweeps,
Exactly.
which is one of the reasons they do all those big stunts, which
Yep.
is ridiculous
Yep.
because those are only on once. But nice
Doesn't make
little,
any sense.
yeah. But it is weird seeing the counter programming here that they have on these weird things. So Sunday, what'd you do?
Sunday. I mean, listen, you got to start with The Simpsons at 8:00. I mean, it's The Simpsons. I actually, the other day popped on Disney Plus to just watch a random episode of The Simpsons, and and was caught off guard a little bit by its brilliance, even though I know how brilliant it is. It was just an episode where I was like, my God, like this show, it's just next level. And this is a few seasons into its run, so it's really kind of probably rocking and rolling around this time. So I definitely would watch that. I'd probably watch an episode of Taxi at 8:30 was where I landed.
Yep.
Taxi was and continues to be still a brilliant television show. What a bench of actors. Really, really, really funny. We did Man on the Moon on our podcast. And I mean, Andy Kaufman was just, he was unbelievable. He was brilliant. Probably from 9 to 10, I probably watched the back-to-back Married with Children episodes, which, I remember watching a fair amount of them with my parents, actually.
Oh,
My mom, my mom has a somewhat edgy sense of humor to a certain degree. And I think that I just remember watching a fair amount of Married with Children with my mom and my stepfather. And feeling like it was kind of a gross show. And it still is kind of a grimy show.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what they're going for.
Yes. I always call it poor face.
It's also just like, I think that part of it is Roseanne's a big hit, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but the resurgence, if you will, of the blue collar sort of quote unquote blue collar, however you want to pronounce, define it. And Fox is just figuring itself out a little bit. The Simpsons is doing really well. We'll talk about the X-Files, Married with Children. Like this is the beginning. This is the burgeoning of the Fox network. So
Fox is an interesting case because, so first of all, this night is also Fox's Wild Adventures at Mardi Gras night, hosted by Pauly Shore and Nicole Eggert. So they're introing all the shows here. Yeah. But Fox started in 87 as what they called Fox Weekend Television. And so the idea they had was we can't, kind of like USA Network, we can't just buy networks in every city. That's right. We don't have the money. So we're going to lease Saturday and Sunday with our programming just at night from UHF stations in every market. We'll negotiate individually. And then as that becomes a hit, we'll get more nights in the week until we're a full-blown network, which worked brilliantly. But Married with Children was their afterthought show. It was the show they did not plan to do. They're two big marquee shows. Stop me if you know this already.
No, I don't.
A show called Werewolf that was essentially the Incredible Hulk, but with a werewolf, and is terrible. So this college kid gets bit by a werewolf, a sea captain, and he played by Chuck Connors, and he spends the whole time kind of traveling from town to town to find Connors to kill him so he can free himself of this curse. They spent so much money on it. They hired, I think, Rick Baker to make the werewolf, but clearly they only shot 3 transformation scenes that they kept reusing that just degraded because it was filmed. So like by episode 20, it's just like the dupiest show. It's terrible. But they spent so much money on it. Then they spent an enormous amount of money getting George C. Scott to do a sitcom with Ed Weinberger, who co-created The Cosby Show, and Conrad Bain, Canada's own Conrad Bain, from Different Strokes, called Mr. President, that was a sitcom about the president in the White House with his family.
Wow. How long did that run? Did that run
2
for?
seasons. The first season, it was shot on film single cam. Then they retooled it for season 2. They killed his wife and brought in Madeline Kahn as his sister-in-law. And all of a sudden it was a multicam show. It's terrible.
This actually sounds incredible.
It is pretty, my friend, you know the movie The Monster Squad?
I do.
Andre Gower, who is a friend and plays Sean in the movie, he was the son of George C. Scott in that show.
Oh my God.
And he's like, it
incredible.
Was awful. Like George C. There was a point on this show where before I'd ask anyone anything, it would just be like, oh, let's just get it out of the way. What horrible thing did George C. Scott do to you? It was like, just like him just being just the worst person.
That's fantastic.
But yeah, so Married with Children was like this total bottom of the barrel thing that they kind of threw on last minute. And Gower actually told me Christina Applegate, and I forget the other actor's name, but he was in the first season of Charles in Charge. They were in a show called Heart of the City, which was like a cop show that did pretty well, I think, on NBC. Critically acclaimed, huge bomb, got canceled after one season. But Fox was like, we love these kids. Let's, we want to have them on shows, so they'll give them the pick of their shows. So Gower's like, I'll take Mr. President. Like, I want to be on that. That's amazing. So they put him on that. They put the other kid on the show called The New Adventures of Beans Baxter.
Okay.
That was created by Savage Steve Holland, who did Better Off Dead and One Crazy Summer and all this stuff. And then Christina Applegate's like, basically, shit, I got here late. What's left? And they're like, because they offered Gower Married with Children the David Faustino role, and he's like, I don't know. Let's see. And so she took that, and then that's the only show that did well. So Fox
because it's everything you're saying to me really just, at least for broadcast television, I don't want to speak for television across the board, but like, keep it fucking simple. Like just a very simple premise that just, and listen, you're talking to a person who, co-created Sleepy Hollow, which is not the simplest of premises. So I don't want to make it sound as though I'm talking on both sides of my mouth. I think that things have changed, but I do think that back in the day, it doesn't surprise me that like a quote unquote lowbrow family show that's sort of kind of all in the family-ish in terms of just being kind of these shitty people, just kind of being shitty, worked. Like, and I would also say too, that on a brand level, and this kind of comes back to what we were saying about Fox, like they're figuring out what their brand is. And their brand at the time was iconoclastic. It was kind of like
irreverent,
shaking shit up, doing weird stuff. Obviously The Simpsons was like the first major animated show to really hit. And Married with Children and The Simpsons are both sort of deconstructions of the nuclear family myth of what television was birthed on.
They were the anti-Cosby, which is a different has a different meaning now than it did then.
Oh yeah,
but,
sure.
But that was
wholesome at the time.
Exactly, that was literally what they said. Like we're the anti kind of Cosby network, and that's what they did. But it also is funny too, looking at when Married with Children became a hit, because the two biggest hit shows on Fox were America's Most Wanted, which was also a fluke, and Married with Children, Cops, which the only reason they did Cops was because as a U.S. citizen in most cities, you have a right to request ride-alongs with police officers because you pay the taxes. So someone at Fox went, hey, we can do this. We can film it. It's free. So that's why they did it. They're like,
it's brilliant. It is. It's brilliant.
So they started trying to reverse engineer shows that would be hits because they're like, I don't know what it is. So they had they had a show called Whoops that was about nuclear Holocaust survivors, and it was a wacky sitcom. It was like trying to be Married with Children. They had a show called Babes that the joke was they're three sisters and they're all really fat. That was it. They had
that was it.
That was
the concept.
They had a sitcom about women in prison, and it was called Women in Prison.
Well, I mean, at least they were open about it. At least they knew what they were doing.
It was like the store brand generic food of a television show. But so it's an interesting network, and this is right around the time where they realized they were sort of reinventing themselves as like the urban black network a little bit too.
Yes, that was also part of their branding. Which, by the way, they went back to that well many times over in the years to come. It's a fascinating network. It's a fascinating time as well when really, if you're being honest, there's only three networks. I mean, it's NBC, it's ABC, and it's CBS. Fox gets into the game. I mean, people forget. I mean, obviously Sleepy Hollow was on Fox, so, but they only really program 2-hour blocks of primetime television, right? Like they don't even really get into, they're not in the 10 p.m. hour, and they never have been. What Fox is now is anyone's guess, really, because it doesn't have a studio, so it's sort of its own animal, and we'll see how that shakes out over the next few years. But just a very interesting, weird sort of thing that is fascinating, and I keep thinking about one of the great things about podcasting, and I'm sure you know this too, is that like you can just do these. I mean, this podcast is a perfect example of it. Do these deep dives into these weird little nooks and crannies of pop culture. And I just feel like if people did just a deep dive into each individual network, in the decades of what they do and why they do it, the changes, the choices, the revolving door of shows and executives and investors, like it's a really fascinating world. Just by the fact that people don't know that much about it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And there's a bunch of great books about it too. Like all of the stuff's documented, like you could do it. And Fox was the first new network since the Dumont network, which went out of business in the 50s. So for 30 or 40 years, we had those three, and then Fox, and then not that long after Fox, we got two new networks that use the same model.
For sure. It's funny. I've had this discussion. I mean, this came up a fair amount on the Felicity podcast miniseries that I did, where like, the WB, I mean, that's my high school years, right? Like Dawson's Creek, Felicity, Buffy, I mean, to a certain extent, Gilmore Girls at the end there, but the WB was working. Like it worked. UPN did not. I mean, it never really clicked. It never really had a hit. So when the CW happens by merging these two networks together, I personally think it hurt the WB. Like, I think that the WB is the one that could have just kept going, doing what it was doing, and quite, successfully so. I don't quite know why they decided to make this mutant network.
I feel like that was all about assets. Like that was literally just purely financial people who are like, you owned this property. Like it was like an arranged marriage more than falling in love, because WB had a distinct voice and a style, whereas UPN was a bunch of black shows that were somewhat condescending and a few that were decent, and then Star Trek. And Veronica Mars. But it just, they didn't have a sort of coherent vibe
brand. I mean, and I would also say too that now when you look at the CW, the only shows that really work are the Warner Brothers shows. Really. I mean, the CBS, Paramount, whatever you want to call Viacom shows, whatever, they have to pick up. They're contractually obligated to pick up a bunch of them. They do, and they kind of limp along for a little bit. I don't say that any of these shows are bad. I'm really just saying that like the audience is clearly there for the WB stuff, which is another thing that annoys me about what happened with HBO Max, which is that there's a Warner Brothers brand. And why did you not want to capitalize on that as opposed to essentially leeching off of the HBO brand and hurting the HBO brand in the process? It's a head scratcher.
Yeah. And I had a friend who is in charge of a bunch of animation stuff at Warner Brothers, and he does a lot of the superhero stuff, and I always bug him about what's going on with stuff. And for 5 years, it was like, well, we're doing the streaming thing, and we have all this stuff. We've done half of this show. And then the next time I see him, they scrapped all. Basically, what would happen is they'd fire the person in charge after 6 months and hire a new person, and just do that every 6 months for like 4 years. And I'm like, maybe it's me and I'm a novice here, but you own all this stuff. It's mostly all digitized at this point. Can't you just put it on servers and have it streaming? Isn't that it?
I don't understand it. It doesn't make much sense to me. I think all of this is more a symptom of just this sort of uncharted waters that we're in, that the streaming, all of these new streaming networks and all of it's just sort of fighting for who's willing to pay the $5 to $10 to $15 a month for the content and this, that, and whatever. So I think it's also a symptom of all of that. It's a symptom of AT&T obviously buying Time Warner and not necessarily being the most creatively minded and a lot more interested in dollars and cents. I just think that when push comes to shove, a strong wall between HBO and HBO Max and really allowing them to be two separate entities. My brain just goes to a place of, why didn't you just call it WB whatever and just make it abundantly clear to everybody that you're going to get HBO in that bundle? Yeah. Because that's all you're basically trying to do is get people to pay more money in order to have HBO. Yeah. So just hammer that home and they'll be like, great. And like that, HBO Max in and of itself, like even just the name just makes my head hurt. Like I'm just like, I don't fully understand what you're really doing.
It's make the Warner Brothers store, but as a network. You want to
The
go
Warner Brothers
buy
store where there's an
Batman
HBO shelf.
animated cells. They got Larry Sanders mugs.
Yeah, it doesn't. I couldn't agree with you more. And if anything, it feels like you're leaving money on the table because the Warner Brothers brand, for all intents and purposes, is far more expansive than the HBO brand is.
Yeah.
So anyone's guess why that happened.
Well, we're not in charge.
At 10 o'clock on Sundays, I picked the back-to-back episodes of Beavis and Butthead on MTV. I did not really watch Beavis and Butthead when it was on, but it was so pervasive. They were such a huge thing. I thought they were quite funny, the clips that I saw. I just, there's such a moment. I think they're trying to do a new one now, if I'm not mistaken, for Paramount Plus.
Every couple years they try to do a new one.
I'm sure Mike Judge will put something together, and it might very well be funny, but it's kind of a thing of its own. It's, again, this sort of a time capsule thing that I'm not entirely sure, along with a million other revivals, makes a ton of sense, but that's, what they're doing.
Well, it's the nature of it too, in that it was people forget that MTV was a music channel.
Yep.
Sounds silly. But there were people who wanted to make shows who had to Trojan horse shows as introductions to music videos.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That was the one, that really hit. And I it's probably my least favorite thing Mike Judge has done, even though it was the biggest high profile thing he did, because it's sort of the most one note.
Yes. Well, it's very, you said it, you kind of teed it up perfectly, which is it had a Mystery Science Theater 3000 kind of vibe to it, it was about picking two guys that could just take the piss out of a bunch of music videos. So he picked these two rocker sort of stoner dummies, and it worked, and people latched onto it. There's not a lot of depth to it. There's not a lot of there. And to your point, I would say everything else that he's done, from King of the Hill to Office Space to Silicon Valley, all of it shows a much richer, deeper well of talent than Beavis and Butthead did at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would always get annoyed because it would be the time when they'd show like obscure videos, usually that I kind of wanted to see. Mm-hmm. So I'd be like, shut up.
It's like, shut up and let me
watch this. It was like, really, like they never show this video. That's just me.
Yeah.
Also want to note, on Sunday night, John Leguizamo's House of Buggin' was on.
Well, there you go. I also wanted to point out an ad for The Burbs.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw that ad there. Tom Hanks just looking like he, got poked with like a cattle prod or something like that. I want to bring it up because on our podcast, we have a Patreon. We're doing the 1989 movies. We're going to be doing an episode on The Burbs.
Oh, man.
And also Turner and Hooch, which came out in 89. Tom Hanks had a very big 1989. But The Burbs is a weird movie. So is Turner and Hooch in its own way. But that ad is, quite frankly, not really selling me on the movie. And I'm not quite sure what the plan was there, but it's an ad nonetheless.
But to be fair, the ads that officially the studio released when that movie came out weren't too dissimilar and didn't really sell people on that movie.
Correct.
Which was part of the problem, because it is a great movie. And the late great Rick Dukeman is in it, of Canadian stand-up fame.
Indeed. On Monday, Jeopardy's on at 7:30 and I'm watching Jeopardy every day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know 2/3 of the answers on Jeopardy, but I just find that I learned something and it was great. And I miss Canadian Alex Trebek dearly right now. So that was, I just wanted to mention that at the 7:30, for all the old people, they watch Jeopardy and then they go to bed, I guess.
Yep.
8 o'clock, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, a great show. Very interested to see what this new configuration of this show is as an hour-long drama. I'm curious. It'll be interesting that they're doing that for Peacock. And then I would also probably check in on Melrose Place. So I'd probably do sort of some bouncing back and forth between those two shows. Melrose Place was a show that, Aaron Spelling just sort of understood America in a way that I feel like Ryan Murphy does now.
Mm-hmm.
Of just understanding how arguably insane and devious we kind of want to be if we're not already. And Melrose Place felt like the beginning of that. Yeah,
it's the wish fulfillment of wanting to be super rich and evil, but also wanting to see those people get really screwed. It's kind of
Yes, I
that's
would
what
agree with
America
that.
wants.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
I wish I could do that, but because I can't, hey, fuck you. Like
Yeah.
it's perfect.
It's kind of, it feels fueled by Aaron Spelling being like, I think America probably hates me, like me as a person, the life I live. How can I sort of fight my demons through these shows? It's interesting.
Yeah, I never watched Melrose Place, but I did watch Models Inc. Because in '95 I was obsessed with models. I was watching House
Only
of
then,
Style on MTV.
It stopped in 95, right?
Stopped in 95.
You're not obsessed with them anymore.
Not at all. But for some reason that world was fascinating. And I watched Models Inc. religiously at 15.
I feel like I remember vividly watching a few episodes of Central Park West.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if I'm not mistaken. I think I watched a couple of those.
The Heights.
The Heights. I mean, Beverly Hills 90210, obviously, we'll get to that in Wednesday's bracket, but or what have you, schedule. But yeah, I don't know. Melrose Place was a show that, and I think about Melrose Place all the time because in my head, I want to develop a show that is about like an apartment complex. Like I think as a writer, I think every writer would love to just be able to build a dollhouse and just fill it with a bunch of characters and just have them bounce off of each other. Because I think fundamentally, maybe I'm wrong, I don't want to speak for all writers, I'll speak for myself. I just don't love concepts. And again, I hate to say, because I did come up with one for Sleepy Hollow.
But high concept's how you sell a thing, but it's the hardest thing to sustain.
Exactly. And you find yourself just twisting yourself into pretzels in order to stay, hemmed to this concept when really all you want to do is write a bunch of characters just talking and messing with each other and the drama that comes out of that. I mean, again, speaking for myself, there might be people that love a high concept. But that's why Melrose Place to me is just sort of like, how have we not had another Melrose Place? Like, how have we not had that happen yet? But,
The interesting thing to me about that too is that whenever we have had a show that was built around a place like that, they're all kind of hot people who are the same age, where I'm like, no, this apartment building, there's like a weird old guy who lives alone. And there's like, there should be, that mixture is kind of more interesting to me. And I can't think of a single show that's ever tackled that variety of people in one place.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a weird animal. It's also, I mean, it took crazy swings. I mean, everyone talks about the reveal where she takes off the wig and she's got the crazy scar. I mean, it really found a way to do big, soapy, weird shit within a somewhat grounded universe. I mean, it was a big hit show. At 9, I said Murphy Brown.
Yep.
I mean, watched it a bunch with my mom as well. I remember she really loved it. I mean, it's hard not to love a show that feels sort of like an updated Mary Tyler Moore, which I'll refer to in a bit as well. But yeah, Candice Bergen, who's just, I mean, she's the best. I mean, you can't. I mean, I just watched her in Soderbergh's new movie, I Let Them All Talk.
Yep,
she's great. She's still fucking great. So I'd watch that. 9:30, Ren and Stimpy, because it's Ren and Stimpy, and that show was fully and absolutely insane.
Yep.
I can't believe that it got made, that it was allowed to continue to exist on, of all places, Nickelodeon.
Yep. And I've had Billy West on a bunch, who's a friend, and just the story, like they couldn't believe it then either. It was literally like, really? You're okay with this? Yeah.
Right. Sure.
And they got away with it, which is kind of fascinating. To your point about UPN too, there is a big ad here for Platypus Man with Richard Jenny, who's no longer with us, and Pigsty, which looks like just kind of a bad Married with Children type show, although this one he's being haunted by a ghost for some reason. But it literally says UPN, the Party Animal Network. So they were like, try that. I don't know.
Let's see if this works.
People into that?
I do feel like of all the networks, they definitely were the one that felt the most spaghetti at a wall. You know what I mean? Just being like, can this, maybe this will work.
They did Homeboys in Outer Space. They did The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer. Are you familiar with that show?
I'm not, but it sounds crazy.
Concept, comedy sitcom about a slave working in the Lincoln White House. It's a comedy, and I had Eric Dagans on, who's the television critic for NPR, and Eric's an awesome dude, and we were talking about that show, and he saw the upfront for that, and he's like, "This," I was like, "What the fuck? What is this?" And he goes, and I'm like one of the only, I think there was like 2 black guys there, and they're asking questions, and nobody's saying it, and I got up and I asked a question, I went, what made you think this would be funny?
Yeah. So Ren Stimpy is a masterpiece. The guy has been proven to be,
a creep,
problematic.
Yep.
And a creep, but the show was brilliant, is brilliant, kind of its own weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago Hope at 10, which, like I said, I liked Chicago Hope. I watched it when it was on. Even, I love a good medical drama, and it's what it is. Addams Family Values is on Cinemax at 8:00 on Mondays, and that movie's a fucking masterpiece.
I'll watch that. It's just, all day, every day.
It's untouchably, unbelievably brilliant. So I'd definitely be checking in on that a little bit. And then, I kind of got to shout out Letterman. I was watching him pretty religiously the next morning before I went to school. And, listen, Letterman's got a lot of asterisks all around him. That's kind of his thing. And, there was that whole clip, that Lindsay Lohan clip that was floating around about a week or so ago, where understandably people were upset about him being a dick. He's a dick. It's
he always was. Like, if you go back to the 80s shows, when he would have Kaufman on, before he figured out that Kaufman was on it, knew what he was doing, he tried to shit on him, like he did with Harvey Picar and John Waters, like all these people that he couldn't outsmart. And you can, if you watch those clips, you can see the gears in Letterman's head moving when he realizes it's not going to work and changes tact, which is amazing. What I
think is really interesting is I fully agree with everything you're saying there. And I think that, that Letterman, when he's shown the door by CBS and they're like, you're done. You've been doing this for 25 years or however long it is. Like, you're done. Even though he wanted to keep doing it. And even though I think Colbert is doing a tremendous job, and I love Colbert, I think it was a real kind of ego check for him. And I think that the show that he's doing for Netflix is perhaps some of the best stuff he's ever done, because he's seeking out people that he knows are smarter than him, that he knows are more interesting than him. And he's allowing himself to kind of grow and be a better person. It seems, hopefully, maybe
he's stripped down. It's like his acoustic album.
It does. And it feels like the guy who's like, he's gone solo now. He's not with the band anymore. And he's doing some experimenting, and he's trying to figure out, what it all means. But I do think that, listen, in his heyday, no one did what he was doing. He broke ground for all sorts of, some of our favorite comedians and some of our favorite television shows, and deserving of the Mark Twain Award, deserving of all the things that I think he has that. Anyway, whatever.
It's just complicated, but Chris Elliott, Bonnie Hunt, like these are people that he championed who, changed things. And it's, I noticed, speaking of people with asterisks next to their name, I don't know if you noticed what I'm noticing on Tuesday night. I
don't know that I did.
It is on Fox. This is a 2-part world premiere miniseries called Love and Betrayal, the Mia Farrow Story.
Oh no. I was like, I literally was like, well, if it's problematic, it's probably Woody Allen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mia Farrow is played by Patsy Kensit.
Interesting.
Woody Allen's played by, I thought it was Griffin Dunn playing Woody Allen, which kind of would be awesome.
Yeah, that would have made sense. Yeah.
But it's someone named Dennis Butinsky. And
the great Dennis Butinsky.
I have to imagine what happened was, even though in 95 people were like, Woody Allen's a creep, there were people who were like, I don't want to piss him off, I'm going to get in a movie. So only Dennis Butinsky was brave enough to play Woody Allen.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Although other people were certainly playing versions of him in his movies.
In his own movies, yeah. I mean, but Jonathan Silverman's not going to be in Love and Betrayal, the Mia Farrow story.
Jason Biggs.
No.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to see that now.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see it now too. I mean, I think that, Jesus, what a
2 parts.
There's nothing good to say about him.
No, there certainly isn't. And Frank Sinatra is portrayed in this movie. Like, it's got everything.
That makes sense. That tracks. Yeah.
So that's, I had no recollection of it whatsoever.
I didn't either.
Patsy Kensit that same year was in an made for HBO movie about ballistic werewolves.
Ballistic werewolves.
Yeah, they were.
What is that exactly?
So they were like, it was her and Mario Van Peebles.
Okay.
And they were like a government black ops werewolf team.
It was called Ballistic Werewolves?
It was called Full Moon.
Would have been better if it was called Ballistic Werewolf.
But they're basically, that's what they are. They're like, it's like Universal Soldier werewolves.
That sounds fucking awesome. I'm not going to lie. That sounds dope.
I haven't seen it in forever. The only scene I remember is there's like a sex scene between Patsy Kensit and Mario Van Peebles, and they transform like during it. But the big thing is they have like Wolverine claws. So
I think I have to search out this movie. It actually sounds kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's I can't believe it hasn't been rediscovered, and
that feels like something that should be amazing.
Yeah, and HBO really promoted it.
It's a different time.
Yeah.
On Tuesday, I had Wings at 8.
Yep, love Wings.
Wings was great. Friends at 8:30. It's also on Thursdays at 9:30. So I'm assuming one is a repeat, but I got them both on here. Frasier's at 9, Mary Tyler Moore at 9:30, NYPD Blue at 10. I mean, it's a solid Tuesday night of TV right there.
That's a great night.
You can't really go wrong with any of those shows, if I'm being honest. They're all kind of relics of different times, but like, I mean, I remember, it's funny when we were talking about Clooney earlier, and that idea of like the actor that is in a million things, a million pilots that don't go. I worked at UTA for many years, and I remember Tim Daly was one of those guys, right?
Yep.
Like he was in Wings, so it wasn't like he didn't have a hit under his belt. He did, right? But you know, the guy wanted to keep working, understandably. He was in so many shows and so many pilots, and still is, and more power to him. Like Tim Daly should be in everything. I don't have anything against him, but it did feel like that same similar
guy,
kind of thing. It's like the guy where like Tim Daly's doing a pilot this year, and like, okay, which one?
He was a great Superman. I will say that.
He was Superman?
He was on the animated series that that Bruce Timm and Paul Dini did. He was Superman.
I didn't know.
Yeah, and he was great. Yeah, Stephen Weber is a friend and has been on the show.
Yep, and he was in an episode of my one of mine on Sleepy Hollow. Lovely guy, great guy. Yeah, he played Thomas Jefferson, of course. Of course. He played JFK in a miniseries, so he's doing all the presidents. Yeah, there you go. Friends. I mean, what hasn't been said about Friends?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just it's great. It still goes down really easily. It's really funny. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I hope that they don't ever reboot it or do anything like that.
Yeah, 20 years later, Friends. John Larroquette show is on. That's the only thing I would mention. That I love that show, and it's dark, and he's great, and he's another one of those guys that they kept trying to make a movie star, and I don't know why it didn't work. Because every movie I've seen him in, he's great.
I think some guys are just TV people.
Yeah,
I think some people are just, and it's funny. It's another Clooney story that I think is interesting. Sort of two very quick stories. The first is that I remember in an interview, he talked about how people see television stars and movie stars very differently. When you see a TV star on the street, people think that they're your friend.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're in their household every day, right? So there's an affinity and a regularity with which you're a part of their lives and in their homes that it's just, they feel closer to you. And a friend of my mom's many, many years ago was on an airplane sitting next to somebody. They start chatting. He says he's in TV. She's like, "Oh, have you been in anything that I've seen?" He's like, "I'm on the show ER." And it obviously happened to be Clooney, and it didn't mean anything to her. Just like it doesn't mean stuff. This doesn't mean stuff to people. But I say all of this to say that some people just feel better in your home than they do on a big movie screen.
Yeah.
And I think John Larroquette might be one of those people.
It's very possible. John Ritter is another one.
Yes, another example. Yes,
amazing.
Yeah,
movie after movie after movie after good movies.
Yeah,
people weren't having it.
Didn't work. Yeah,
people were like, no,
don't know why.
Don't do it. Yeah.
NYPD Blue, another show that had a revolving door of casts that somehow continued to work. I feel like NYPD Blue and ER to some degree, ER probably to a bigger degree in terms of how people were willing to go back into that show with the cast changing, which is very rare.
Mm-hmm.
And NYPD Blue was one of those shows. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, oh my God, why am I drawing a blank
Bochco.
on Sipowicz's
Dennis Franz.
he was in through the whole run. So like they had that to hold on to, and then it was just who his partner was, and people seem to be okay with that being anybody.
Yeah, they're like, this is fine. We have a rock to hold on to in this. Yeah. And it's not Beverly Hills Bunts. Which
Correct.
That's an example of don't put Dennis Franz in a sitcom.
Correct. On Wednesday, I had Beverly Hills 90210 and Party of Five, just a solid Fox Wednesday block of just two shows that obviously speak very well to each other.
This is a very famous episode of Beverly Hills 90210.
Oh, which one is it?
This is the episode with a cameo appearance by the Flaming Lips.
Really? Did they play the Peach Pit?
They did.
There you go.
They did. She don't use jelly. This is the same.
That's
year,
amazing.
Yes, this is the same year that the Cramps were on Beverly Hills 90210. That one makes sense though because
does it?
Yes, that episode was written by Christina Leese, who played Emily Valentine, who is an old school punk kid. From Boston.
Then, yeah, that does make sense.
And the Cramps were her favorite band, and she wrote it in so she could meet them.
See, I respect the fuck out of that. I if I had a show where I could have a band on, I would absolutely do that so I could meet them.
Who would you have?
Oh God. I mean, in 1995, it's the Smashing Pumpkins, without a doubt. I mean, it's definitely them or Garbage.
Okay.
They're probably in that vicinity. A little later, it's probably Radiohead. I mean, even now, it's still probably Radiohead. But if we're talking about any artist, if I could have anyone on any of my television shows, Bjork, number one with a bullet, no question.
On Sleepy Hollow?
She'd fit on Sleepy Hollow.
Exactly, yeah.
She could have been a villain and it would have been amazing.
She's a witch or something?
Yeah, I would have. Boom. I mean, now, God damn it. Another reason to be sad the show's gone off the air is I can't have Bjork as a villain, as a witch.
Yeah.
But, what do you know?
She could have played John Noble's part.
She could have. And it would. She is. Listen, I could talk about Bjork for hours, but one thing I'll say about Bjork is she is ageless. She could literally be. She could be 50. She could be 20. She could be 150.
Yes, I do want to mention I do love John Noble. We're rewatching Fringe. Fringe is
and a lovely, lovely man. Truly a gentleman and just so nice and sweet.
But can play evil so well.
Yeah, he relishes it. Like, I think he enjoys being able to put that hat on so that he can be it. But yeah, he's tremendous. And then at 10, I had Star Trek: The Next Generation because I never really watched it. I couldn't really get into it either. But it's a show that so many of my close friends love, and it's one of those things that if it's on, I should watch it.
There are people who I don't think of as liking sci-fi at all. There's two things that people shock me that they love, and it'll be like wrestling and Next Generation. It'll be like, really? I loved it. Watch both those. And for whatever reason, it's people who don't watch anything else like those things, but they watch those things.
Yeah. It's so funny. I've been doing this podcast with Kenny now for 3 years. I love him. I consider him one of my best friends. I didn't know he loved wrestling, and it still baffles me to this day. And I don't say that to be like people who like wrestling are lesser than, because that's obviously not what I'm saying, but it is it feels a little bit antithetical in my brain.
It didn't seem like him. Yeah, on stage I used to do a bit about the hierarchy of nerdy interests.
Yes.
And it was like it was like horror movies, sci-fi movies, comic books, big huge chasm. It's changed now, but then it was like role-playing games, which is why they had those in the back of comic book stores, because they were like the pornography of comic book stores, but made them the actual money they were afraid to sell. And then another big move in adult wrestling fans, and then like ICP and KISS fans. That's like kind of how it went.
Yeah, that feels right. That feels right.
There's two amazing things on that Wednesday night too, because it's Sweeps Week. There is National Geographic's Great White Shark NBC special.
Singular,
just one
of them.
And then after that, there is hosted by noted Trump fan Antonio Sabato Jr., credited as of Earth 2 fame, which, if people don't know that was a show, is extra funny. It's like Antonio Sabato Jr. from Earth 2.
I like that.
It's a show he's hosting called The Hunt for Amazing Treasures, a new 2-hour special for the first time. 300-year-old pirate treasure revealed before your eyes, plus millions in gems on a sunken ship, new gold from an old mine, and legends behind lost treasures.
He doesn't seem like a guy that makes sense for that.
No. You want Dennis Farina.
Yeah.
You want,
Yeah.
You need some gravitas. You don't want Antonio Sabato Jr.
Yeah.
Maybe
You want
Antonio
like a James
Sabato
Earl
Sr.
Jones. You know what I mean? Yeah. No, I agree with you.
That's no good.
On Thursday, I opened my prime time with some Canadian content of Due South. There was a show about a Mountie for several seasons, guys, and if you haven't seen it, it's pretty charming.
It was a big hit here too, which was crazy.
Yeah. I mean, not Schitt's Creek big, but certainly big.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised that we haven't had like a Due South resurgence, because if you put that on Netflix right now, all sorts of Canadian shows are popping because of Schitt's Creek. I think Due South could have a real moment.
Yeah.
So I had that at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, Seinfeld. Obviously, I mean, it's Seinfeld. Friends at 9:30, and then ER at 10. It was a repeat this week, but next week's episode is perhaps my favorite episode of the television show ever.
What is it?
Which is Love's Labor Lost, which is the episode where the entire episode focuses on Green trying to deliver this pregnant woman's child. Bradley Whitford plays the husband, and the entire thing is about how everything goes wrong slowly but surely, and that ultimately he loses the wife, saves the baby. But it's I think everyone kind of agrees that it's the best episode of the show, because it really sort of, it does everything that show can do, encapsulated in such a powerful. It's just and it's a real showcase for Anthony Edwards, and it's a tremendous episode.
It feels like it's in real time, that episode.
It does.
I don't think it is. It's sort of a bottle episode.
It is. It is similar to that. Yeah. You get your timestamps periodically after your commercials so that you know where you are. Then the whole thing probably takes place over the course of a few hours, but it feels as though it is in real time, as you mentioned.
Yeah, which it really is an amazing episode.
Yeah.
Friday night, final night of the week.
Friday night, I got Family Matters at 8 because it's Family Matters and Urkel, and I'll give Family Matters another shot. I'm Bewitched at 8:30.
I love Bewitched. I was a Bewitched over I Have a Dream of Jeannie all day.
Yeah, it's such a shame that it feels like people just swap them in their brains, like that they're not the same. They're very different shows. Like
Monsters and Addams Family. Addams Family is a much more nuanced, funny, amazing
it's a better
show.
Yeah. 9 o'clock. Obviously got X-Files. I don't know what episode it is this week. But
it is 9 o'clock. This is a repeat from 93.
Okay.
This is Scully and Mulder travel to the Arctic to investigate the deaths of scientists. Yeah. So it's kind of their take on The Thing.
The Thing, yeah.
Xander Berkeley's in this episode.
Yep.
Felicity Huffman is in this episthere
Nice.
Which people forget about.
It's a really good episode. I don't go super deep on the X-Files. There are a couple blind spots I have in my television knowledge. The X-Files and Buffy are the two most glaring ones. Buffy is not something I see myself diving into anytime soon for obvious reasons, despite the fact that, we should perhaps find ways to separate art and artist, but I'm not going to get into that.
I'm waiting for the made-for-TV movies about behind the scenes of Buffy.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'll wait for that too.
Yeah.
And The X-Files is a show that is, I know, gets very rickety. So like there's a part of me that's like, maybe I should just buckle in, watch the first 5-6 seasons, which is when everyone says it's good, and then just pretend like the rest of it doesn't exist. But someday maybe. And then at 10 o'clock, Picket Fences. Speaking of David E. Kelly.
A great show that sadly only the first season is kind of accessible now. And I think it went for 4 seasons.
Yeah.
Because it was also a big hit show. Mm-hmm. It was greenlit in the wake of Twin Peaks as the sort of weird small town shows, just like Northern Exposure was, even though to your point earlier, where the high concept, you have to Trojan horse shows into existence sometimes based on what's popular, and Northern Exposure and Picket Fences are good examples because they're nothing like Twin Peaks. But if you watch the pilots, you see how they were greenlit in the wake of that and then moved on. But that is a great show. I do want to mention that the X-Files was one of the shows that, as a viewer every week, it was really evident that they did not have a plan. It was quintessentially
150%. I think that, which is really interesting, because when you look at someone like Vince Gilligan, who's come off of the X-Files, obviously, who is notoriously, unbelievably focused on making sure that everything he's on is a Swiss watch, and that they know everything and every turn and every sort of corner. And
maybe that's why.
I really do think it might be. I think that. I mean, the X-Files broke so much ground in terms of the fact that it somehow juggled serialization with procedural, that you could have a bottle episode, that you could have a monster of the week, but you could also have your big mythology. I mean, it's pretty insane to watch that pilot now and just be like, oh, well, this is the fulcrum point. Like, this is the Rosetta Stone for basically every genre show that came after it.
It set the standard for having mythology in a show like that, because everything before it was Monster of the Week, Kolchak the Night Stalker, like all the shows that influenced it. It brought in that serialization again, like ER, around the same time. That's sort of what the change was. Yeah.
But I think it also, you know, the brilliance of it, the gift of it, right, is, you know, and I assume the pitch was, you know, Monster of the Week. We've got this, you know, it's a two-hander. It's Mulder and Scully, blah, blah, blah. But then aliens. And because aliens are so big and so just sort of like, it can amorphous and you can kind of do whatever you want with it. On some level, it's a mythology that a studio executive in 1993 or whenever the show, I think it was 93 or 94, could be like, okay. So like, we're going to find it if there's aliens. And you're like, sort of, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. Is that what you want?
but like when your mythology is that, that's the brilliance where it's like, oh, like that's the silver bullet at that moment. Right now, your mythology needs to be, they kick the tires on the fucking thing 8 times to Sunday to try to figure out, you know, every whatever. But that's what's so brilliant about it.
Yeah. And weirdly, so one of the reasons they greenlit it was, did you get the show Sightings in Canada? Did you get Unsolved Mysteries? So.
Yes.
So Unsolved Mysteries was a big hit.
Yeah.
And the weird thing about Unsolved Mysteries was I always say that show would be in the same episode, Bigfoot and a rapist. They would have a real life crime and then something totally bullshit and put them on the same keel. And it was bizarre. So Fox went, let's do that, but just with the Bigfoot and aliens. So it was a show that was a ripoff of Unsolved Mysteries, but just aliens and stuff. It was on Friday nights at 8:00 and it became a massive hit. And they were like, wow, what if we did a scripted show that would follow this? Which is hilarious that the show that became the X-Files, they're like, we need something to show after Sightings.
Yeah. Which I think is, I mean, that's hilarious. And it just goes to show, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but so much of television is just a fluke. So much of it is just, we're chasing this thing, and then by going down this crazy blind alley, we stumble upon this thing, and someone comes up with a great idea, or we think it's a terrible idea, or we even think it's a bad pilot or series, but we're kind of forced in a corner. I mean, Grey's Anatomy is notoriously a show that ABC and Steve McPherson didn't have a tremendous amount of faith in. Shrunk its order, released it with, you know, kind of dumped it in its own weird way, and then it's the biggest hit. You know, it's just so interesting to see how fortuitous fate and all these things. You just don't know. You have no idea what people are going to gravitate towards.
So what I'm looking forward to from you, as a TV show creator, and I don't want any credit or money for this.
Good.
You're going to go to Fox and you're going to reboot Werewolf, influenced by the ballistic werewolves from Full Moon.
I mean, I'm not kidding when I say that if there's a way for us to merge those two ideas together, I am fucking in like Flint. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, first of all, I am going to search out Full Moon because that sounds
I need to rewatch it.
It sounds incredible. Yeah. And Werewolf, I mean, equally sounds. I'm just going to Google Werewolf right now because I just want to see what the fuck it
Werewolf
looks like.
Is, if you can get a Canadian IP address on your computer, CTV is streaming all these shows now for free, and Werewolf is one of them. They have the entire series. Is
it the 1988 show or 87?
Yep.
Hold on, I'm just looking at a poster. I mean, what's great about it is like the poster doesn't even hide the fact that they're trying to make it look like the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I gotta say, some of this makeup is pretty solid.
That's what they spent all the money on. They put a ton of money into it.
Werewolf looks great.
It really does. And the posters that they put up were lenticular.
Oh god.
So they had posters like subway posters that were kind of 3D, and the transformation scene's great. But like I said, by episode 5, they've clearly been running the same film through the camera, and it's like super degraded and the same shots. And it's just.
I'm looking up the Full Moon movie. What is it? What year is it?
97, I want to say. Full Moon, HBO Pictures, Patsy Kensit, Mario Van Peebles. I don't know who else is in it.
I'm trying to see if I can just find a picture.
Full
Is it
Eclipse.
Full Eclipse. That's what it. Full
That's it,
Eclipse.
yeah.
That's it. Full Eclipse. Hold on. I mean, oh wow. I mean, it's really, it's 93. It looks great.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna have to watch this because like it's movies like this that just make you happy that you get to work in this industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're just like, why do we do what we do? And then you see this, and you're like, this is why we do it, for stupid shit like this.
I like to think some guys like decades long project was Full Eclipse. And then he finally like, this is all. And once I do that, I can quit.
I mean, it's a great mic drop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all good stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have to follow up at some point in the future.
Please do.
Hear what you think of Full Eclipse and Chuck Connors with an eye patch playing a werewolf sea captain.
Absolutely.
And a pipe. Werewolf with a pipe.
It's great. It's really it's so many hats on hats. It's great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And truly, I appreciate you reaching out and we'd love to have you on our podcast.
Oh yeah. Anytime. Like I said, I saw every movie in the theater in 99 for real.
I mean, I'm sorry. Because there's a bunch of those that I really wouldn't have wanted to have seen in the theater. But it's been a blast to do, and obviously this has been so much fun. So I really do appreciate it.
Oh, baby, I see you in my TV set. Yeah, baby, I see you in my TV set. I cut your head off and put it in my TV set.
There you go. That's Phil. Super smart guy, interesting guy. Love talking to him. And as I said, check out his podcast if you haven't already. If you have, continue to check it out. Speaking of continuing to check things out, I assume you'll be here next week because we're still going. Haven't missed a week yet since we started on Valentine's Day 2014. I don't know how that's possible, but we're sort of barreling our way towards episode 500, which is insane. If you want to go to our Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/TV Guidance Counselor. Give a buck, whatever you want to do. It's much appreciated. It helps me do the show without losing money. If you want to buy a t-shirt or a book bag or whatever, you can go to our TeePublic store, which is teepublic.com. Use their TV Guidance Counselor. You can email me if you have guest requests for people you want to hear on the show. I always try to get them, even if I don't know who they are. But I take all of your suggestions to heart. And you can do so at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken at icanread.com. I'm at TV Guidance and at Kenneth W. Reed on all the social media. Most people probably stop listening to the episode by now. I assume as soon as you hear my voice after the interview part, you just tune out. But if you haven't, I love you. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you again next week for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor. So, this stupid landline is the bane of my existence. Oh my God.
It feels like a bit though, which is great.
Yeah, it really does. But
it's the best part is it's buried under so many pillows and things that it honestly feels like what's happening. Anyway, it's fantastic. I loved every bit of it.